I've briefly talked about tool holding in some of the other introductory videos, just as a matter of course as we're doing other operations. But I wanted to do a video dedicated just to tool holding here and show you some of the different options you've got and different ways of doing tool holding. Some of these you haven't seen yet, so some of these will be new in this video. Others you have seen already in use. I'm going to give you a description of them here, and then once we're done with those descriptions, we'll go ahead and show some of them on the lathe itself.
So this first tool post we're going to take a look at is a rocker style tool post. It's a fairly basic tool post, but it does offer some nice adjustment. I do also want to mention quickly that I ran into some video corruption, so you may notice that my voice has changed. I've had to re-record this section at a later date. I hope that doesn't provide too much of a distraction to you. But this rocker style tool post is very similar to a standard post, which we'll take a look at next, except that it has a concave portion here with a small shim that fits in that rocks back and forth, as we see. Now if we put in, this particular one is a 1/4 inch, put in a 1/4 inch tool in there, and the advantage that this gives us is the ability to change the height of the tool without using shims. So you simply raise it, lower it to where you want it to be, and then tighten down the screws. If it's a little off, you can adjust the screws by turning them in opposite directions to change the tool orientation. Pretty basic, simple little tool post. Quite convenient for again, quickly adjusting the center height of the tool.
Okay, the next style we're going to take a look at is more of just a standard tool post. This just simply has a slot cut out of it. There's no rocker on it. The way that this is going to be utilized is you are going to have to use some shims to adjust the height of your cutter. So these shims you can get in a set at pretty much any parts store. They'll be sold as feeler gauges typically. And all you have to do is open up this set, and you'll have all the shims you could ever want to do this type of operation with. Now in this case, this particular tool holder is designed to hold up to 3-inch tools. 3/8 inch tools. Those 3/8 inch tools are going to be a little bit larger, give you a little bit more stability versus the 1/4 inch, but the 3/8 inch holder can hold a 1/4 inch tool. Now if we were to just put this directly on the lathe, this is going to be far too low. One of the things that we would start doing then is taking some of our shims and placing them underneath of the cutter in order to raise it up to our desired height. Now on a mini machine such as the Shoreline, clearly these shims are quite large, and you could probably get by with cutting these in half or even a third. And you would want these to extend as far out as you can just for the support on the metal here. And you'd simply add different thicknesses of shims until you get to the needed height. Now this tool can also, as I mentioned, is designed to hold a 3/8 inch cutter. And with that 3/8 inch cutter in there, we're going to get, again, more stability. It is going to be a little bit longer compared to the 1/4 inch. So if we needed to go deeper, we could go further out with it. You do want to have that as far back as possible, though, during your normal cutting operations. One thing I have found is that even though this is a 3/8 inch tool holder, at least with my particular brand, this puts the height a little bit too high. It needs to be a little bit lower. So you'd either need to grind or file or machine down a little bit off of the bottom for this particular brand of tool. Now maybe with Shoreline tools or other tools, they may be slightly thinner, or the set to the carbide might be slightly lower, so you won't have this problem. But that I have found on the tooling that I'm using, which comes from Anytime Tools, the 3/8 inch sits up a little bit too high in the 3/8 inch holder, even with no shims at all. And normally you would want to obviously shim this up so that you can get some precision. Now this particular tool holder They do make in a 1/4 inch and a 3/8 inch size. I'm not positive if they make others. This particular one has an additional hole on it designed for a boring bar. If we compare that to our rocker style tool post, it's solid. So there is no additional hole there. Now, if you wish, you could probably quite easily put a hole in there and use this as a boring tool as well. One other item that I don't have an exact example of is what's known as a turret style tool post. I'm going to use this to demonstrate the functionality of a turret style tool post. So a turret style tool post is designed to hold 2 or more tools. On larger lathes, this will typically hold 4 tools, and typically they will both be cut slots like this, or grooves, rather than a groove on one side and a boring bar on the other. But this is what I have to show as an example, so this is what we're going to use. On the Knurling and on these mini lathes, one of the problems you're going to run into is the extension out on these in order to use them as a turret style tool post. Knurling does make one of these, I believe. I'm not sure if it's for a 1/4 inch or 3/8 inch on either side. The idea here is that you could mount this on the lathe, be doing cutting with it in this manner, whichever direction, and then just simply by loosening the center post, you could spin it around and do another operation with a different tool. In this case, it would be boring, or if you wanted to use this boring bar as a facing tool, you could. So it allows you to quickly switch between 2 tools without removing the tool, changing its height, or having to completely remove the entire tool post itself. So that's something to keep in mind if you are going to go with a more basic style tool holder. Again, you could probably quite easily machine any of the standard ones to put another groove in there if you've got either a milling table on the lathe or a milling machine itself. I don't have what's known as a lantern style tool post. You don't see those as often now, but it does give you some more rigidity, and it gives you the capabilities of the rocker style tool post, but you don't see them very often anymore. Now this is a new acquisition for my Knurling. This is what's known as a quick change tool post. So this particular one has plungers and a cam internal to it. So as we move the handle, that plunger will come in and out. If you look there on the side, it's not very much movement, but that locks a tool holder in place on it. This particular model does use a cam with a ram or a plunger style on it. There are also other styles that will have an adjustable shim on one edge, and then another style that the quick change tool holder is split and the entire dovetail expands in and out. Each one has its pros and cons. This is probably the lowest cost variety, is the plunger style, and it's going to work fine for the majority of tasks on a small lathe such as the Knurling. Now this is simply a holder for other items that attach to it. For example, this will slide on and attach and give us the same functionality as either our fixed tool post, as we showed here, or our rocker tool post. And it gives us the functionality of both with some additional useful features. The tool simply is inserted in. So I've just quickly, there are 4 set screws on here, and I've quickly tightened those down just loosely to hold the tool in place. You don't need to worry about any shims on these, and you really only have to set the center height once, and then you're done. This simply slides onto the mating dovetail, and then you use the cam to lock it in place. So taking a closer look at the tool here, and the tool holder, is it will slide up and down. It has a lock nut here and a thumb screw. By turning this thumb screw, we can adjust the height of the tool as high or as low as we want it in order to center it on the machine. Once we find that center or height that we want to use it, we tighten down the lock nut and secure it. You could also use a nylock if you want it on here, or use a little bit of thread locker to make these hold a little bit stronger, depending on how often you're going to change the tooling around and things along those lines. The advantage here is if we take this off and put it back on, that thumb screw always indexes the tool to the exact same height. So we can take that off, replace that with, say, a 1/4 inch tool. We haven't removed the 3/8 inch tool. It's still sitting here in our holder and its height is properly adjusted. As we slide this guy on and we were to adjust the height of it and lock it down, then use the cam lock to secure the tool on. We could cut with a smaller tool. Maybe we're doing some finer work or need to get into a tighter space. Then when we're ready to switch back, we can switch back to that 3/8 inch tool and be ready to go right off the bat. Another thing you could do here is, instead of different sizes of the tool, you could use different shapes of the tool. So here we have a left and a right hand cutting tool. Give you a quick view from the top of the differences there. Maybe you've got a center grooving tool or other tool, and you can just quickly switch back and forth between your tooling and not have to worry about setting this, because again, you would have these set once, locked down, and then you don't have to really worry about it. Again, depending on how well you lock that down, you might want to check it every now and then. So this is a great tool for that purpose. This is kind of the what I feel to be the ultimate for the home shop machinist. There are going to be some production settings where this isn't going to necessarily be the best tool, but for somebody who's doing a lot of manual machining operations, this is going to give you much quicker changing of your tooling and fewer headaches with setting the height of your tools, as you really only have to do it once. Now, taking a look at the tool from the top, it is designed to hold multiple tools, so we can hold one tool that way. With this centerpiece locked down, the entire tool is locked to the table, and then we just use the cam to simply unlock or lock our quick release pieces. And with tooling set up in the proper orientation, you can also use both dovetails. Now, this tool is backwards if we were to then want to use this for a facing operation, but the cam does lock in both locations so that isn't going to go anywhere. So you can make as many of these as you want, or buy as many of these tool holders as you want to meet your needs. Starting off with 2 or 3 is probably good. That's probably going to be the typical number of tools you're going to be using, but it all depends on the type of operations you're doing. Another advantage here, though, is that we can do other shapes and other versions of this same tool holder. So this is one of the variations that we can do, which is a boring bar holder. It's going to be very similar in design and function to our standard tool holders. And for a boring operation, we'd simply place it on this side and lock it down. Now we're ready to do boring. And just quickly, we can switch back to a facing operation and have the tool locked in place for that. I haven't actually mentioned it, but this particular model that I'm showing here is made by A to Z CNC. They seem to be definitely the most reasonably priced, one of the more popular options out there, and they had quite a few options in the way of tool holders go as well. So take a look at these guys. Shoreline makes a model as well. I don't recall the style, and there are a few others out there, as well as you can make your own. But in this price range, just the materials you're going to have to buy in some large bar stock, if you can't find scrap, you're probably going to spend as much or more. Another variation of a tool holder is for a cutoff tool. Now, if you don't have the quick change tool post, for a cutoff tool like this, you're going to need to use a cutoff tool holder such as this one that comes from Knurling. And it works on the same principles. It has a shallow groove here, and then it has a couple of screws that squeeze that blade down rather than the screws don't push down on the holder itself. So this keeps the holder in better shape because you can keep grinding this shorter and shorter as you need to as it gets dull, and you can get quite a bit of life out of a tool like this. Another option is you can put a riser block on this tool post, and when you put that riser block tool post, you end up putting this on the back of the lathe cross slide, and you invert the blade in this manner. This allows you to leave this on the tool and do multiple cutting operations without needing to change tooling. As an example to this setup, assuming that these were mounted on the bed of the lathe, we could be doing our cutting and facing operations with this tool and have it mounted and not need to remove it. And then once we're ready, we could simply move in to begin our cutoff operation and work to the center. So that'll give you a little bit of advantage, even if you have a quick change tool post, which has that cutoff tool holder that I showed a few moments ago. This type of rear tool post mount is still going to be a little bit faster, and the reverse mounting of this makes the cutoff operation a little bit safer as well, just in the fact that the piece is getting downward force put on it, so when it comes off, it's more likely to fall rather than to go up in the air if it were to catch on the cutter. So you could use this in combination even with a quick change tool post. Another really good use of this type of a setup is in CNC operations, in that you can do a lot of the shaping on your piece and then the cutoff without needing to stop the machine, depending on what you're doing and how repetitive the operations are, things along those lines. Now those are some of the basic shapes and sizes of tool holders you can get from A to Z directly or through one of their resellers. Some that you may want to actually end up making would include one with a Morris taper. So this particular unit, A to Z doesn't manufacture, at least not that I've seen, and neither do any of its partners. But we'll use this boring tool holder as an example of how that Morris taper would work. Now this could be cut to either a 0 or a 1 size taper, and we could simply put our drill chuck into our tool holder, such as this, and have it locked in place. We'd have to use a knockout bar to remove it, or as an alternative to cutting a Morris taper on here, you could cut a new shank for the drill itself, possibly even purchase a shank of the right size. Now you can do drilling operations with your cross table and the full length of your bed. So this gives you a big advantage, since the ram distance on the tailstock is fairly minimal. You can do now holes that are several inches deep, 5, 6, 7 inches deep, if you so desired, and then had the need to. Now you do have to obviously worry about lubrication, and that's going to be not a common task you want to do because it is going to be fairly time consuming, but it does give you the ability to do that and quickly switch. The other advantage here is we have our fine adjust on our vertical, so we can adjust this vertically to center. And we have our cross slide table, so we can adjust this horizontally to center on our piece and get more accuracy that method than perhaps a worn tailstock might give us. Now there are other options obviously, but there's one for you. And here's another tool holder that is made by one of A to Z's reselling partners, which is Little Machine Shop. And this is a tool holder designed specifically to hold the Little Machine Shop knurling attachment. This is the knurling attachment from Little Machine Shop that I was just mentioning. This unit can be held in a standard tool holder, whether it be one from Knurling such as this, and it can hold in place along those lines, or if you're using a quick change tool post, you can hold it in the same manner. Or With this particular post, you can remove this bar and this will attach directly to the quick change tool post through this adapter. The advantage here is that you're not going to have as much flex, so it's going to be quite a bit more stable. And rather than purchase or manufacture, again, whichever you choose, another slotted, this is a fairly easy piece to manufacture to be used here. So here I've gone ahead and removed the bar that comes on the tool holder, on the Knurling tool, I should say, by default, and put on that quick change tool holder. And then this can slide on, and again we can use our height adjustment and lock down our cam to do knurling operations, which we haven't talked about yet, but I'll do a future video on that to show you exactly how this tool works. So here I have a couple of those tool holders that we just talked about mounted on the lathe itself. You can see here in the background, I've got the cutoff tool mounted upside down on that reverse raised tool post. It's not straight at all, so I just threw that on there quickly. You would definitely want to make sure that that was straight and centered correctly. And then on the other side here, we have a 3/8 inch right hand turning tool in our quick change post. Now there isn't a lot of room in between here, so if you're working on a larger piece, you are going to have some problems as you move the tooling in and out. You want to make sure you're not contacting front or back unintentionally. So that's something to be aware of, just due to the very short cross slide limitation on the Shoreline. One other thing you could do to help alleviate this or to help negate this, depending on exactly what you're doing, is you could play with one of these tool holders in the front slot and another one in the rear T slot on the table. To change tools, all we have to do is quickly loosen this bar. Right now it's locked, so that tool's not going to go anywhere. We loosen the ram, off the tool comes, and in its place we slide a left-hand cutting tool. Once we're done with that tool, we remove it, and in its place goes a 60-degree center cutting tool. And we simply lock it down like so, and that tool isn't going to go anywhere. Something else I wanted to point out here is that with the cam handle locked, the unit's still locked in place through this top screw. If you do a lot of work where you are adjusting the angle, they make a little accessory, or you could probably manufacture your own to make this quick release as well. Whether you do that with a second handle or a wing nut style screw, or however you wanted to do that, you'd have that option. Again, just to reiterate on the ability to raise and lower these cutters simply by turning these thumb screws, and that allows us to set the height of the tool center with the lathe, and as we take it on and off, we don't have to mess with that adjustment again. So I hope this was useful. That's the majority of the tool holding that I can think of. We can obviously do tool holding in the tailstock, but that's much simpler. We've kind of already looked at that. And then we've also talked about the ability to hold tailstock type tools on the table with a custom made holder, with either a Morris taper or changing out your drill chucks to have a straight shank. Your Morris taper is going to be your better option for repeated center alignment, obviously. So I hope you found this useful. After this video, I'll start doing some on work holding in the lathe and showing you the difference between concentric chucks, independent chucks, 3-jaw, 4-jaw, lathe dogs, faceplate work, all the different varieties and things we can do along those lines.